at the peak of my career after graduating, I coached in the NCAA for 6 years. I was a sports scientist for some of the top professional soccer, football, rugby teams around the planet. And I noticed one thing was common between veterans and athletes. Their performance often was impacted by their mental health, and nobody talked about it. We talk about it now, but it was still cliche at the time. So as a veteran, now I'm thinking about this experience I had with the plant, not only how it healed my body, but it kept me pretty calm. I didn't have nightmares like I did when I was on opioids. And I
Right.
noticed a lot of athletes at these teams were sneaking to consume cannabis. It was very common. NFL teams, I've had NFL players tell me 70, 80% of their entire team use cannabis. So now as a strength coach, I'm curious. I know I used it and it helped me, but I'm in the
Mhm.
NCAA and I cannot tell these athletes that they can use cannabis. You see that conflict?
Yeah, I deal with it myself. I sit up with patients prescribing pills, but I'm sitting there thinking, gosh, we could probably knock out 3 of these if you were using cannabis. And you don't have to smoke. People think, it's all about smoking. You don't have to smoke. Yeah, and it puts you in a query where you know one thing, but you're doing the opposite.
Absolutely. So, I mean, I think I kept seeing it repeatedly. Athletes were consuming cannabis. Sometimes the team would just know, or coaches would know, and people just, it was something you couldn't talk about. You couldn't say
Mhm.
yes. If they got caught, they knew the punishment. It was just kind of one of those things. But I think what became eye opening is when you see things like Sha'Carri Richardson, when she's of age, she's in a legal state, she's on the Olympic stage. So if she can compete with this in her system, it's clearly not a hindrance. And the
Mhm.
rule was that the organization that regulated her sport still saw it as bad, even though she technically went through all the right processes to access that. And when you realize she was grieving the loss of her mother, right, it puts into perspective kind of this question, like, again, are these rules actually doing anything for us? Are they just rules from 1937 and the 1960s? So kind of at the peak of my career as a strength and conditioning coach, COVID hit. I saw so many athletes that were isolated from their families, 18 years old, first time away from home, didn't have a
Mhm.
high school graduation because of COVID, and they're terrified. And
Mhm.
truthfully, I knew athletes were consuming cannabis to help them relax. Um, and at the same time, I was also consuming cannabis. So I'm a coach consuming cannabis, can't tell them.
Right.
They're consuming cannabis, they can't tell me.
What I think is interesting about this, though, knowing doing one thing and saying the opposite, right? And when one thing that I see come up with people that are a little apprehensive with cannabis, that aren't quite sure how they feel about it, that they still look at it as like heroin. It's still this horrible drug, this horrible thing. And as soon as you say, some people might buy into the medical side, but as soon as you say, well, I'm using it to relax, I feel like people want to say, well, why do you need something to relax? And I feel like that is something that we need to clarify, right? Keep in mind, people use alcohol for that reason all the time and no one says anything, right? But I feel like we're in a really high stress world that it would be, I love a good meditation, okay, but I feel like we need sources to bring us back into balance. And I almost want to say, what if we didn't say, oh, I'm using it to relax, what if we were saying I'm using it for balance? I think might be and I'm not criticizing you, I'm kind of thinking this out loud with you. I'm wondering if
Yeah.
it would be seen more acceptable, because as soon as you say, "Oh, I needed to chill out, I needed to relax tonight, so I used cannabis," people are like, "Oh, really? Oh, you're sitting around getting high." No, I'm using it to really balance my body, and to be truthfully, that's what it's really doing, right?
Absolutely. And I think, one of my favorite things that I learned about when I was in college was, how people have an adrenaline rush, right? Fight or flight, right?
Right.
So I'm sitting here resting right now. I'm digesting my dinner. My heart rate's pretty calm. My food is digesting. And then I see a pit bull and my little dog on the other side of the yard. And all of a
Mhm.
sudden, just from what I saw, you have to really think about how our perception really drives our internal systems. So as a
Mhm.
strength coach, I'm thinking about how in the world does a person's entire nervous system switch to this preparation phase, to this readiness phase, to this high alert. Hey, cortisol is going through the roof. Heart rate is up. We don't need blood for digestion. We need blood in the muscles so we can fight, so we can act. This is probably one of the most profound crossovers between cannabis and exercise. This is
Mhm.
where I saw this opportunity. You just said it. If people are looking to relax, why is relaxation a bad thing?
You said a bad
Well,
word.
right. So we would have to consider what's the opposite of relaxation. Most people say stress, regardless of what type of stress it is, emotional stress, physical stress, right? Environmental stress. We now know that these things pull us out of homeostasis. What you talked about is balance, right? This balance.
Mhm. Mhm.
This is sports in a nutshell. This will make sense why veterans and athletes are consuming cannabis when they're already stressed out. They're always dealing with inflammation. They're not sleeping well. They have poor diets. They're stressed out because their performance is what determines if they keep their job or not. You understand that as a doctor. When your
Mhm.
mind, just your mind, our perception is so powerful. If I know tomorrow that there's something stressful going on, my body can start the stress preparation before I want to. So now I'm
Right.
in this chronic state, chronic stress. Even though the stress isn't there yet, I'm thinking about the last one and the next one. So now my body, all my systems are out of whack. I'm not digesting my food. I'm not sleeping well. And we see this in both veterans and athletes. We call them now high performance populations. So that's what I research. High performance populations are people who are never going to get that ideal 8 hours of sleep, are never going to have that balanced diet. They are people who they're always going. And because of that,
So
their
just
nervous system is so stressed out.
for people that are just now coming in, this is Stephen
Mhm.
Philpot, who is veteran strength coach, cannabis sports scientist, educator, and we're talking about everything. We met a couple years back, and we're kind of just having a conversation about the work that you do, the research that you do, and as far as I'm concerned, you're the golden ticket in the cannabis space. I might educate, I might communicate, and I help patients, but the people that are doing the research that's the missing element. Like I was going through the internet working on a case for a patient the other day, and I started seeing calls for people to participate in studies. That's brand new. That you wouldn't see it, at least not on the internet. You might have a little quiet group over here, but to be able to say, wow, there's a study going on, and to be able to say to my patient, there's a study going on if you want to participate for, oh gosh, I think it was for essential tremor. That was exciting. I felt like now we're doing something. And honestly, this is the work that you've been doing for many years. So, and so right now we're obviously talking about, which I think this in itself is fascinating, talking about the difference between relaxation, which is apparently a bad word, stress, which is a dirtier word, and how cannabis is actually the balancing key for our body. So
Yeah,
yeah.
I think one of the most interesting things that I learned. So obviously, I just talked about my sports career during COVID. At the peak of my sports career, Chicago or Illinois was going recreationally legal.
So
What I
you're in
realized that
Chicago now.
no, I'm in North Carolina now, but I lived
You're in
in
North
Chicago.
Carolina now. Okay, but we met in Chicago. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yes.
So I
Mhm.
actually ended up managing 3 dispensaries in Chicago when we first opened. I had been studying on my own. I had been a home grower for a couple years as a medical patient and a veteran. So I had been doing a lot of research. I had people in Oregon and California I was able to learn from. And I was like, you know what? I feel like I want to know what's going on when they legalize cannabis here. I was disappointed to see it very much a retail product, very much a consumer good. When we
Mhm.
started off, we had medical, and
Mhm.
6, 7 months in, medical was off the shelves. It was all recreational.
Okay, so with us in Ohio, just now going recreational, I want you to outline that a little bit more about what that. So obviously, you're medical in Illinois, And you have, I don't know, probably the typical products that you see, a couple variations of cannabinoids, hopefully some variation around THC levels, flower, tinctures, gummy, the whole thing. What happened from going medical into going recreational? What was the difference?
Yeah. So what's interesting is the company that I worked for ended up buying one dispensary that already existed that was medical. The other two dispensaries that they opened were recreational, so they were never medical. So the pre-existing business that was already medical stayed medical, but they added rec.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so now you have a dispensary that's half medical, half recreational. After a
Okay.
while, the medical just disappeared. It was no longer, I don't know, the dispensary wasn't certified to do medical anymore.
Right.
So
So you
then
have
it
to
just
pay for
became
the license.
right. So all the places that were medical and recreational decided to just be recreational. And little by little, there was less and less medical products, less and less medical dispensaries, and to the point where it was all recreational. And I've actually seen this as a rinse and repeat formula in different states around the country. They say first it's going to be illegal, then it's going to be decriminalized, then it's going to be medical, and after that you'll get both. The last step is when they get rid of medical and it's just recreational.
So how long was it where you had at least some medical and rec before the medical disappeared and it was only mainly rec?
Less than a year.
Really?
And I'm saying this as a veteran who had a medical card, so it was a benefit to me, right? So every dispensary, you could only have one dispensary as your medical location.
Okay, we're
So you
not
had
like
to
that.
say, yeah, so your card was registered to one location, and that one location you got like different benefits and
Mhm,
tax deductions and stuff like that. If you ever
mhm.
wanted to change, you need to go in the system and say, hey, I'm now getting from this dispensary. You could always buy recreational, but medical, you could only get the
Both in
benefits.
one place.
Yeah. So after a while, you'd go in and show your card, and they'd be like, oh, no, everybody buys here. It's recreational, as if it was a benefit to me.
Yeah,
So it's a
but
big,
okay,
yeah.
so wasn't there also there were discounts from the veteran
Right. So
side?
there was a tax deduction.
Right. Okay, so like for instance, in Ohio, there's you won't have to pay the additional 10% tax that they're adding on to what they're already paying if you have a medical card. And this is concerning because I have a lot of my patients are elderly. And I had a woman asking today, will I always be able to utilize this card? Will I always be able to get the medicine that I'm looking? And she's already struggling to find what she is currently using, but she wanted to know would it always be there. And I couldn't say yes. I couldn't say, when we opened, we had like ACDC, which is a mainly CBD flower. We had some like 8%, 13%. I struggle now to find anything below 20%.
Yeah. And I mean, you have to think about this. I was a dispensary manager. I was in charge of inventory. So everything that you saw, I had to make sure the THC percentages were right, had to make sure the barcodes lined up. I mean, and at this point, it's pharmacy level compliance. That's pretty
Mhm,
serious.
mhm.
What was super interesting was all of a sudden one day there was a 25% tax added to all products over 20% THC overnight without warning. And it was a customer facing tax. So that tax went to the consumer, not to the dispensary who was purchasing the flower. So I said, now there's almost this incentive if you need to hit your numbers to keep going higher and higher and higher. And now, I mean, it's pretty transparent. People know that there is a THC inflation problem.
Mhm.
Essentially, boosting your numbers or looking around. If I send my flower to 3 different labs, I'm gonna pay for the test from the lab that says my flower is the highest because I know labs are very
Absolutely.
inconsistent. So
There ab
that is what made me leave the dispensary. I was having a talk with the CEO of my company, and he said, "Man, you're super smart. You know about nutrition and wellness and all these things." He said, "You're not going to be here long." I said, "Am I going to get fired from the dispensary?" He said, "No." He said, "No. This is retail, though. Would you go to Target and ask, hey, which of these skincare products has hyaluronic acid at 5% and is going to be good?" That's not what
No,
the Target employee.
it's not a pharmacy.
So I
Right.
was told essentially like everyone else here came from Target, from REI, from Home Depot, from all these retail places. You're
Hmm.
coming from a sports and wellness background. I'm sorry, that's just not how we operate. And honestly, it broke my heart, but it propelled me to go back to school.
Well, okay, so that's the good part. However, they should have brought you in and said, this is what we're looking for. I've seen people that have very you wellness, holistic, focused backgrounds, social workers, educators, nurses, people that want to be in the dispensary space and run it with a wellness point of view. And either they're not given that opportunity or they're there for a little while and they're like, you know what? We don't really need that type of education around here. We have a pamphlet. You're good, right? And so because I believe cannabis is a space where people are unhappy with the traditional medical space right now, right? It's incredibly toxic for doctors and nurses. Patients are unhappy. And we can take this new plant idea of medicine and create a medical space that is the model for what we want our medical space to look like. But that's not even because it's not that idea is not it can be, but it is not a money making idea. It could be, but that's people are like, "Well, sell flower, sell high THC, they're done." And they don't care if they get bought out by the pharmaceutical companies coming down the road because they came in to make a lot of money to get bought out and move on to the next hot thing. So we have an
Yeah.
opportunity here with someone like you, but that was, I mean, how long did you last? How long were you running the dispensaries?
I think I stayed at the dispensary for about 8 months. It was less than a year.
Goodness. Okay.
Yeah,
Wow.
I didn't. The thing is, the dispensaries are based off of numbers. You need to make your sales. I'm gonna tell you right now, we weren't making our sales goals. Everybody thought that they could just come into Illinois and Chicago. People would love cannabis so much that we would always be sold out. It would
Mm-hmm.
no. Most people just enjoyed feeling a little less decriminalized, feeling a little less stressed out. But most people still went to the same person that they bought from before. Our average age was like 55 years old. So these are
Mm-hmm.
people who are in need, right? These aren't people who are just recreationally just consuming. So when I realized we weren't hitting our numbers, I found out that guess what companies do when they don't hit their numbers? They fire part-time workers.
Yep.
And growing up as a part-time worker with a mom who had to work, I was like, oh no, I can't be the manager telling people, hey, we need to let you go because we're not making our numbers. When I
Mm-hmm.
know in my heart, if we talked about terpenes, if we talked about the different type of cannabinoids, if we talked about aeroponically grown flower versus hydroponically grown flower versus
Mm-hmm.
soil grown flower, if we talked about varieties, if we talked to people, there's so much education, you would have a following. People would love to be a part of this education and a part of this journey. But if you're looking at it like, hey, we have 30 lotions on the wall and just pick which one you want, then there's no place for you to really have a niche brand and a specific audience. And that's why I'm glad that I was able to, while I was doing my own research, I actually
Mm-hmm.
taught at a local community college. And a lot of my
Mm-hmm.
students ended up, that's where you and I met
Mm-hmm.
when I was teaching at Olive Harvey. A lot of those students in 2020 are now social equity license holders in Illinois. And
Very
what they
good.
learned was there's always going to be big business, but there's always going to be craft as well. You have big
Mhm.
beer, Anheuser-Busch, Miller Lite, but you also have craft beer, local beer, brew with chocolates, brew with oats, with nitrogen. People pay a little more for it if you educate them on what's the difference in quality. And they typically have there's people who will never buy cheap beer. They want to pay more for better beer. So when you see a
Mhm.
lot of cheap flower and cheap cannabis products across all states, that's an opportunity now for us to educate, talk about the differences in quality, talk about some of these differences in like small local grown flower versus what happens when you mass produce things.
Mhm. Yeah, so do
So
you if we let's say you didn't leave and just work with me for a second. If most of your patients were 50 and older, people that might have used it back in the day, got away from it, but having, met some medical issues or are balancing, right? Stress, life, okay? Don't have a don't have a plug, So they don't, this is how they're getting back into the cannabis space. If we invested in that demographic, do you think you would have made sales goals? Do you think if you invested at everything that you're talking about, the education, making it almost like a wellness center, making it a place where they can learn, they see, they try, they talk, that it's a safe place, it's an experimental place, it's an education center. If dispensaries offered that, do you think you would have made sales goals?
I think absolutely, because what's interesting is anytime that you, for instance, a nutrition event at a church, you have elders at the church. These elders are typically experiencing pain, sleep, and or appetite issues. Those are pretty much across the board, one of those three issues. You can then go in already knowing who your target audience is, elders in the church, in the Black community who likely are not, eating the best. You then go into the church and what do? You educate on what fried foods do to your body. You educate on what unhealthy foods and sugars do to your body. And then you educate on healthier alternatives. That's pretty much it. We're so big on like marketing and adding data and statistics. People want to be met where they are. They don't want to be talked down to.
They want to be met where they are. And there are so many people I know that use language and share information because they like to hear themselves talk and feel smart, and not even thinking about who their audience is so that they can make a difference. People say, I can't tell you how many medical conferences I've been to, and everyone's sitting there like, oh, yeah, yeah. I'm like, you don't even know what that dude's saying up there. Doctor, you know the difference. You know when you're like comprehending, and then some guy is just saying and talking and look at this chart and blah, blah, and all. And I was like, nobody's listening. They just want to know what the final thing is and how does this change how they practice medicine, right? But they want to hear themselves talk. Now they could break it down so that people could understand, but no, they feel good about themselves, right? If we can approach people where they are, provide the information that they're, and not make them feel bad about where they are in their journey, congratulate them for being in the fold, we would make a bigger difference. Because right now, even just in the medical space, these numbers are wrong, take this pill, right? We don't really say why your hemoglobin A1C, number one, what is it even? Okay. Why do you want it to be lower? Okay. What is the long-term, like really get into, if we don't lower it, what will really happen? Okay. You overwhelm people with way too much information that they don't really get it in the if you gave them bite-sized pieces, they'd get it, but you just overload them with information they can't take in at one time. You say, take this pill, 30% of prescriptions are never even filled at all because you don't meet people where they are. No, I hear you.
Yeah. And I mean, that's one of the things throughout my research. So like my master's research was actually in exploring the plant itself. In a dispensary, you get an eighth and there's a THC number on it, and that's pretty much it. I was curious as to how you got from a seed into that. There's a lot missing. We would need a whole episode just to talk about what's missing on that pipeline. But what I did realize is we're actually talking about a living organism. Cannabis is a living organism. Regardless of how we think about it, it's a living organism like us, like dogs, like trees. It's a pretty powerful living organism. We think that cannabis cures all these things or it treats all these different ailments, and nobody knew why. Cannabis led us to discovering a new system, not just in the human body, but in almost all life on earth. That's the most profound thing about it. So even now we say the endocannabinoid system, to your point, people repeat it and don't know what it is. No, it's something that people hear, the ECS. I have to tell people, hey, there is a system that regulates all the other systems. We had no clue about it until the 90s. And the only reason we discovered it is because somebody in the 60s was exploring cannabis. So that, right, when you think about that, that's really profound. We didn't know why cannabis had any effects. And through looking at cannabis, we discovered a system in humans, bears, cats, fruit flies, jellyfish, most life on earth. And all those life forms are using it to survive and to mitigate stress, like we were talking about earlier. Right. It's one of those like, hey, it's a lot more profound conversation that this plant is making these molecules, and so are we as humans.
Hmm.
Right. So that's one of those, that's more of a more philosophical kind of wider point, but it also helps you talk to people in different aspects. The dietitian understands supplementation. If I'm low on a certain vitamin or a certain mineral, the dietitian knows where I can access it in nature. This was medicine before the 1800s. Synthetic medicines have only been around since the 1800s. From the
Hmm.
1800s to 10,000 BC, plants and fungi were the only other thing we knew. We didn't know anything else to treat. So you really have to think about it. It's 2024. The 1800s is not that long ago.
Right.
Even
Right.
cannabis up until the early 1900s was a primary prescribed treatment. So it's just
Hmm.
like there's a living organism. It's been used for thousands and thousands of years. We haven't been taking synthetic medicines that long, and cannabis has only been prohibited for less than 100 years at this point. We are really going back to where we should have been.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with you. I totally agree with you. I want to get in some information from the audience a little bit here. We have Jeff Lafayette that says, "Yes, I agree with you, Stephen. You can. It takes educating the older generation. In Colorado, activity directors take older people in a bus to cultivation labs and dispensaries as an actual activity and to educate." Um, First of all, we need to take the doctors there. Like we need to get everybody on the bus. Everybody got to get on the bus, and because there's so much education that really needs to happen. He says for assistant living communities, as well as here in Ohio, it's all about the numbers without without a state stakeholders. I've seen it extremely change since the beginning. Absolutely. Yeah. No, it hasn't been easy. It hasn't been easy. And I've worked hard to try to create a conversation, but where it's an odd, and I know you've seen this, because you're in education, you're there to try to make a difference, but you're in education, but you're interweaving this into a business industry where the people that you care about and you're trying to educate, whether it's the student or the patient, big business doesn't always really have a good hold on that, nor do they. I don't want to say they don't care because I don't want to put words in people's mouths, but that's a difficult place to be in.
Yeah, I think something that's really interesting is the time that cannabis took off in our country. Cannabis has been slowly, and I don't say legalized, it's been slowly decriminalized. It's been
Hmm.
slowly recreationally regulated and taxed state by state. During COVID, it became an essential business in a lot of states, and the industry was catapulted forward financially. But truthfully, when you look at the people who are disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs, I'm from Chicago. Everybody has these questions. Why is Chicago the way that it is? I want everybody to know these words. Chicago looks the way that it is because the war on drugs worked there. If you are wondering what it looks like when the war on drugs works, it looks like Chicago. The neighborhood I grew up in, that I lived
Hmm.
in, it used to have thriving black businesses. People wore suits, people danced. Etta James and Louis Armstrong they would
Hmm.
perform there at local businesses. It was beautiful. It was Black Harlem.
Hmm.
And then the war on drugs worked. So when you look on the news and you're like the inner city and these 15-year-old kids, we used US taxpayer dollars to go into black and brown businesses and tear them up saying we were looking for cannabis.
Hmm.
That is deeply disturbing, but you also have to realize that we cannot move the industry forward and say that, oh, billions of dollars made in India, in Illinois, billions of dollars made in Colorado. What about the people who are US taxpayers, who are US citizens, whose ancestors' livelihood was torn down systemically? That's something that we often forget. And I say that not as, to stir the pot, but I say it because it's directly related to health disparity as well. Who are the communities
Directly
that are the
related to
most
health.
impacted by health? There's a
Yeah.
direct correlation between these things. So this is what in school got me so interested in this topic. But as I go down the line, it brings me back full circle to these health disparities, to cannabis being a natural plant, similar to prior to the 1800s, we used plants as medicine. It's not as
Hmm.
deeply profound as we think. It's almost just like a mindset shift. The
It's a
point
mind
didn't
shift.
really change, right? Our health and the way we live, a lot of those things didn't change. It's just our mindset. But we can't change because of the dollar, to get to your point. That can't be what drives the change. Medical patients are the only reason we're having this conversation. When prohibition was running rampant, there were veterans going to Congress. There were sick mothers going to Congress. There were mothers, all these things. There were people going to Congress saying, I can't stop coming here because I have a daughter who's had seizures her whole life and they stopped.
Right.
There's nothing
Right.
you can tell that person. And there's so many people who've had those profound impacts: veterans, multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's, the list goes on. All
But
those people now have evidence and we're ready now.
the entire industry is built on the back of patients. And then as soon as we become recreational, we almost forget that they ever existed. We parade them up to Congress, right? We put them in the wheelchair and roll them up there ourselves. And as soon as it becomes recreational, we forget they ever existed. Another comment here is the Emerald Triangle in California, true craft cannabis suffering with competition. Yes, but they're still trying
Yeah.
to do it. Yeah, absolutely.
And so that's one of those things you have to consider. Emerald Triangle is famous, that you're thinking about wine country pretty much.
Mhm.
When I say meet people where they are, the FDA might have one conversation. But when I talk to the USDA, I want to talk about the grapes that are used to make wine. I want to talk
Mhm.
about how the farmers have protections over their land to protect the uniqueness of the environment because of how the grapes
Mhm.
are produced and how that
Right.
affects inequality. So something that's mass produced indoors, no matter how much I recreate these indoor environments, I can't compete with the Emerald Triangle and the different rock content and the way that the water breaks down the rocks and you have minerals in the soil. We are truly at a kind of like scientific revolution. But excuse me.
Yeah, you're fine. Even talking about that, and we're talking about even the health disparities that people experience, I definitely want to dig in to really the health disparities when it comes to veterans. Obviously, you shared that you're a veteran yourself, and this started even with your own injuries, right? And so, if anyone needs to have access to medication, it's the people that have protected this country that we utilize the rights that we have now and the protection and the safety that we have now, right? And so when you look at what is going on with veterans and not even veterans, current serving military, like what do we there's so many things again where the environment and you tell me that environment is also can be incredibly toxic. And there is a need to sleep better, feel better, into balance, right? So what are your thoughts on that and where are we going to go?
Yeah, I think that's why I'm interested where I am now. I had full ride offers to go do PhD Ivy League schools.
Mhm.
Actually was doing my PhD at NC State recently, and ended up leaving. I'm in a family of doctors, and I witnessed firsthand what doctors are going through right now with the
Mhm.
healthcare system, and I call it the mental military,
You did
because
not
of
lie. You did not
kind of this
lie.
indoctrination of push through, do
Mhm.
more, do more. As a veteran, I saw what mind over matter. You can do amazing things, but I also saw what happens if you keep pushing. And I think so many people in our society are pushed right now. They're not pushing anymore. They've been pushed so far that now our perception of reality is kind of changing, right? We're having this big awakening. Everybody's like, hey, my job's not that important anymore. My family is. And I think when you see that going on in the world, you have to then ask yourself, like, okay, what's possibly going on, right? It's really interesting to see veterans as one of those groups who, right, was pushing initially with those patients. And now you have big groups of veterans that's still going to Congress, going to the UN. They
Mhm.
are an example of that burnout that we're talking about, that stress that we're talking about. What happens if you keep pushing? What happens if you push too long? So where I work now, I'm a research associate. I work with veterans and athletes as well, because athletes and veterans share a lot of those same symptoms of burnout, where their nervous system is not getting a break. They're always pushing, they're always going. And long term, we see diet issues. We see issues right with your sleep. We see issues with your mental health. And if you keep pushing, you can push too far. So I think that's kind of where we are now. Society is looking for something to kind of lower the temperature, and cannabis provides this kind of non-toxic alternative to all the other things we've been using. And I think people in the military, if you want to ask somebody about stress, I think that's a good population to start with. If you look at the homeless population in the US, the majority of the homeless people are veterans. That says
Yes, yeah,
something about the country when you
yeah,
think about that, right? So people walk up to me and say, I support the troops. And I'm just like, we have so many homeless people in this country. A lot of them were experiencing a stress that no one could help them cope with. And they began looking for stress relief in different places. And
hmm,
unfortunately, when you're looking for stress relief in different places and you find it, sometimes you end up people don't wake up one day and say, I want to be an addict. They wake up saying, I just want this pain to stop. I want this
right.
stress to stop. So that's why I think it's not just veterans anymore. Everybody feels that way.
Everybody's
And that's why
feeling.
cannabis is so profound, because it does connect all of us in that kind of similar way.
It does. It does. Right. And it's a safe alternative to what has been available for so long. And we have an opportunity here. I honestly, I could talk to you forever. And I'm gonna have you. So look, the sheet I gave you to sign up for, just sign up again, because I would love to continue this conversation. I feel like you're a voice that I want the cannabis community to hear more from. So let's figure that out, because you're on one side seeing things, I'm on the other side seeing things, and there's so much in between us that's not being addressed. And I feel like that's something that we can really do. So if
Absolutely.
people wanted to connect with you, kind of share how to connect, and what who do you want to connect with you? Who do you want to, what connection are you looking for?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can find me on Instagram at Coach Jackpot. I'm a writer for the Kenigma and Sports Cannabis, which are two online platforms. We do a lot of education on, obviously, sports cannabis is self-explanatory. The Kenigma, there's a group of pharmacists, doctors, myself. We educate on kind of some of the more common topics and questions related to cannabis. My name on LinkedIn, you can find me really anything right now. I have a consulting company, as you'll see my name above, Anzisha Consulting. We work with everything from athletes to veterans to social equity businesses that are actually looking to create a brand to connect with their local organizations, nonprofits, churches, and communities through education. And we really want to help provide some of those pipelines. I got an opportunity to do that in Chicago. I
Mhm,
really loved it. And I realized the war on drugs didn't just happen in Chicago. It
mhm.
was systemically all over our country. So we have communities that need our help right now. And with that, that's really all I have.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I didn't do this earlier, so let me just kind of throw this in, that we do appreciate and want to shout out to our sponsors, which include Compass Naturals, Indovibe Cannabis Center, Spender, The Cannamom Show, Believe, 614 Network, Cannabis BPO, Columbus Botanical Depot, Daga Digital Marketing, Hemp Box, etc., and the Ohio Medical Marijuana Physicians Association, along with DustinCava.com. And if you did not know, we're part of a 501c3 GHH Community Foundation. So when you give to the foundation, you're helping support our books and allowing authors to come in and share their stories without having to take on any financial burden. So very exciting to share that with you today. Let me say, we have one last comment here. Thank you, Dr. Bridget and Stephen, for a great day, and keep doing what you're doing. We appreciate you as well, Jeff, and what you've provided to the cannabis community as well. And let's look into, meeting up very soon, and you are on crutches right now, and so hopefully you'll be off of those quickly and able to, get around a little bit better.
Absolutely. I appreciate you for having me.
Absolutely. We'll talk to you soon.